Sweet life, you were always quite contrary. Does it make a difference on the other side? As I sit here watching from the quiet mortuary, does it mean so much now that I have died?
Okay, so it's the moment that I'm sure all of you guys knew would have to come. I'm going to review Werewolf by Night, directed by Michael Giacchino and produced, of course, by Marvel Studios. I've tried to declare kind of a moratorium on superhero, comic book based things, the MCU, etc. Uh, since I got the impression that maybe I was, flogging a horse that didn't need me to flog it. I felt like my Marvel episodes were not well received or were not received at all by people who like a lot of my film reviews. And a lot of the people that I would like to watch the Marvel reviews instead flock to these clickbait fanbro sites and don't get enough information and alternative viewpoints on this material. So this one I feel like I had to do for a lot of reasons. First of all, it is Marvel's first Halloween special, their first special presentation, as they call it. They're going to do, these one shots, like 1 hour specials on Disney Plus from time to time. And I think they're going to cut down some of the miniseries that they've announced to this format. The law of diminishing returns has set in with Marvel. She-Hulk is just, it's not egregiously awful like Ms. Marvel, like offensively bad, but it's pretty bad. It has its moments, but it's catering to, like Ms. Marvel, it's catering to an audience that totally different than me or most people that I know who either really are into the MCU or really enjoyed the original comic book characters. They're trying to hit other demographics here, and I really believe Disney is driving them towards that, trying to kind of Disneyfy everything. Something, people insisted would never happen, and Disney insisted wouldn't happen, and Marvel insisted wouldn't happen. But yeah, it's happening. But it's weird because we've been blessed with a karmic gift, which is this Werewolf by Night special. So this premiered on Friday, October 7th. And I'm reviewing it because it is a Halloween special. I'm going to do a series going forward in BLU review of Halloween streaming. Just stuff I'm streaming that's Halloween appropriate. I'm not going to cover any movies that I've watched streaming that aren't, at least not, in October. So my plan for October basically is just to do some episodes similar to the ones I was doing last year, where I'll review like maybe 3 movies I watched streaming on my different sources for that, and just give you basic reviews of what I think about them. So they could be positive, they could be negative, whatever. Mostly they're going to be films that I've never seen before, but that I think sound appropriate, seem appropriate, that interest me. I'm not going to go out of my way to do themed episodes. I'm not going to go out of my way to make sure I shoehorn in certain essentials and classics. I've done that 2 years in a row. So the only time really I'm going to go into that area is probably on Halloween Eve itself. And it'll probably be a title or some titles like that will be covered, but there'll be ones that I've never reviewed on this channel before. Because face it, I mean, some I've reviewed twice. Now, admittedly, some of them, like Cannibal Holocaust, the second review caught on a lot more than the first. But same with Cannibal. Well, I was going to say same with Cannibal Apocalypse, but I actually had originally reviewed them separately in different videos in 2020, and then 2021 Halloween I made a double feature of them, and that video has gone to get about 8,000 views, and that's gratifying. You know, it started catching on when the channel itself began catching on. On that subject, before I go diving into Werewolf by Night, please drop a like, and subscribe. Give me the thumbs up. This really helps me combat the algorithms. My stuff's going to get lost otherwise, especially when I'm talking about something, you know, that a lot of people are doing videos about. Now, I haven't watched any videos about Werewolf by Night. I have not read any reviews. I've caught a few hot takes and blurbs and quotes from Rotten Tomatoes and things of that nature floating around, but very general stuff. So I haven't read or watched any real reviews or dissection or analysis of this. So I want to try to make this under an hour, and I think another reason I was getting maybe a little burnout, but also maybe burning you guys out on the Marvel stuff was, you know, I would take an opportunity to compare the source material to the MCU take on things. And to me, it was important to give you guys a lot of facts if you don't know them, or if you do know them, to go, you know, have something resonate with you, clear up some things. I know a lot of shit about Marvel characters. I mean, that's just the way it is. More than quite a lot of people on these clickbait sites. I mean, there are some people who know a lot more about, say, the comics of the last 15 years that Marvel's published. Absolutely. And I've recommended those sites to you guys before. I'm not going to again, because again, I don't want to go down in that direction any longer, at least not for a while. But as far as classic stuff from World War II all the way up to the end of the Bill Jemas era around 2004, 2005, I would say I'm an authority, an expert, whatever. You know, I mean, I've been holding my own conversations with Roy Thomas, who was the editor-in-chief and successor of Stan Lee all through the 1970s, who spearheaded, edited, and or created or co-created the second big wave of Marvel characters, and oversaw that. The period where he was in charge was exciting, and it's a fertile period. I love it even more than the 60s era. Even though it was, you know, Jack Kirby and Ditko were absent, but Kirby did come in halfway through the 70s. Roy had, you know, stepped down as editor-in-chief, but his influence was there. So driving forward, and Werewolf by Night is one of the comics that you can include in that. I interviewed Roy Thomas for Indie File Magazine, a free regional alternative weekly or monthly, sorry, based in Charlotte, North Carolina, in July of 1997. I had already interviewed Neil Gaiman, and that issue was, you know, our kind of big hit issue that year. I mean, they were free, but they moved to, you know, the publisher brought them to Heroes Con, and, you know, that was the summer that Gaiman's Neverwhere was debuting on TV, and he was kind of making the transition from comic book writer into novelist and into, you know, selling his works to other media. A long time ago, 25 years ago. Wow. Over 25 years ago. And I talked to him on the phone. I interviewed him, Neil Gaiman. I met him at the Heroes Convention that year. I heard him do a reading, talked to him a little bit. That's the story for another time. But Roy Thomas, you know, lives in South Carolina, so he would come down and on Saturdays out of the 3-day con, Friday to Sunday, once a year, and starting in 1992, and that's when I met him in person. You know, this guy had an inestimable impact on my life. You know, he was responsible for a lot of things I was a fan of. He was a booster of things he was a fan of that, you know, he helped put me on to. He was very literate. He kind of expanded the Marvel universe into a kind of interconnected, literate kind of multiverse thing where all kinds of characters could coexist. It seemed like the Marvel universe You know, it seemed like everything existed within the Marvel universe at one time, except for the DC universe. Uh, but, but you know, we had the Squadron Supreme, so Marvel, I mean. Uh, but anyway, I was coming off the Neil Gaiman interview, and I interviewed Roy. Roy was apparently not pleased with Mr. Gaiman after the way Mr. Gaiman uh, kind of treated a lot of the Justice Society concepts that he inherited that infused the early Sandmans, and then were picked up again toward the end of the series. So there was no love lost there, and you know, I didn't tell Roy what camp I was in. I think he was kind of, I don't think he was, I don't know if he was annoyed or not. He probably wasn't thrilled that I interviewed Neil Gaiman and I did it before him and it was a big deal. But he was gracious enough because I had talked to him at the same convention. I don't know if him and Gaiman ever ran into each other. And then we started talking on the phone. I got his home number from a guy named Stan who used to sell comics at the Metroland Expo just outside of Charlotte. It was like a monthly expo of all kinds of used stuff: books, comics, collectibles, toys, furniture, um, you know, jewelry, all kinds of incredible, wild shit was there. It was a lot of fun, and me and my ex-wife met this cat Stan, and he lived in South Carolina, and he knew Roy, not Stanley, and he, with Roy's permission, gave me his home phone number. So we talked on the phone a handful of times, and I did an interview with him, and I wanted to focus in on his tenure as the editor in chief of Marvel. So I asked him basically one by one about characters that I was interested in, that I knew he had created or co-created, that he had kind of got the ball rolling, and one of them was Werewolf by Night. So Roy Thomas, he told me he had the idea basically from the film I Was a Teenage Werewolf, with Michael Landon as a teenage werewolf. And so he was basically a young guy, not quite as young as Landon was supposed to be in the movie, but he named him Jack Russell humorously after the dog, in joke. And basically he was kind of like maybe late teens hippie, maybe 20, I don't know. And his younger sister, Lisa, was supposed to get the curse at 18 too, which he had. She was a little bit younger than him. So, and you know, it was carried on from their father, and you know, it was not only carried on by their father, but the curse, but it was also originally acquired through the magic tome called the Darkhold. Now, the Darkhold's been used in Marvel material, live action material, MCU material, featuring the Scarlet Witch, WandaVision, and the last Doctor Strange film. But they have not mentioned the Darkhold in the Jack Russell story yet. But they have adapted Jack Russell to the screen. They've done some interesting casting, and they've done some translations of some of the concepts and characters that took me off guard. Restored a lot of my faith in not a lot, a good bit of my faith in the MCU. Maybe it's not all played out. Because the turning point for me really was Ms. Marvel, but then She-Hulk was like, well, okay, I'll give it a shot, and I'm going to wait for Daredevil to cameo or have a guest appearance. So last week, Daredevil, Matt Murdock, played by Charlie Cox, who most people who know me or know this channel know that Daredevil's one of my all-time favorite TV series, probably my number 2 after Twin Peaks. Charlie Cox is one of my very favorite and underrated actors. And he totally nails that character. He embodies Matthew Murdock and Daredevil. And I've been a Daredevil fan since I was about 3 or 4 years old. So, and I'm ancient. So, I watched the episode, of course, and it was good to see him. There were some nice bits with him, but the milieu was, it was a little weird. It was a little weird seeing what I'd feared happened, toning down the character, the edge of the character, and Disneyfying him. I knew Cox could easily play lighter material, and he could kind of draw on the period of Daredevil's comic book history where he was kind of a smart aleck and a swashbuckler or whatever. I mean, that's legit. That's part of Daredevil's history just as much. The Gene Colan era is just as much, if not more, crucial than the Frank Miller and post Frank Miller era of Daredevil. But to me, they're equally important. I don't hold sway. My favorite Daredevil writer was Steve Gerber, who wrote it for about 20 issues. But I like a lot of the Daredevil material all through the years. It's been one of the more consistent series about an ongoing solo character that Marvel's ever published. So anyway, I decided, well, there's going to be one episode after the Daredevil one that's coming up this Thursday, and I might not even watch it. I was inspired by an article by a brave guy who said, we're not obligated to watch everything Marvel makes. I was like, thank God someone else is saying this besides me, because it's heresy. After my explosive encounter with a cat named Charles via Zoom, it was like an MCU, booster, to put mildly, and charitably. I just was like, I'm turned off by this attitude. I really kind of makes me want to vomit, to be honest. I mean, I've complained about fan bros a lot, but to actually realize somebody you've known for a number of years who's older than you, who really has knocked a lot of mainstream comics more than I have over the years, especially Marvel, for him to be a convert and so dogmatic about his allegiance to this brand, and he was so personally insulting. What do they call it? Ad hominem with me, and I was like, wow, okay, this is like political. I mean, this is like, being a Democrat or a Republican or a Christian or a Muslim or something. It's like that level of blind fanaticism and refusal to see another viewpoint. And that's okay. That person is out of my existence, and I'm happy about that. And I've done a video talking about it at length. I've done two, actually. And, one I erased and upgraded, or, I took down and updated the situation. And I lost several friends who apparently were the ones I'd gained the same night that I had this encounter. And that's fine, because they see this character, Charles, as kind of a superhero also. He believes that he's Lord Greystoke incarnate, and he has friends that humor him. That's fine. I've said many times that this is what these cats want to do. It's cool. There's been overlap with me in my life and my interests and intersections. And as far as the interests go, there still is. There always will be. However, the way the fandom has shaped up and the way the attitude of some of the adherents, not the ones who've been the most successful, who've actually penetrated the mainstream market, pertaining to the new pulp stuff and the Walt Newton stuff and the farmer fandom that I've talked about before. Not so much them, not so much people like Win Scott Eckert or Meteor House Books, but the coterie around them. There's a few that there's not really any affinity between us. And when I chose to do Flicker Street solely, I lost a lot of cachet with those people. I mean, some of them I'm sure wished me well, though to be frank, only a couple of them in that entire scene ever verbally have wished me well on Flicker Street. One of them is my dear friend Sean Lee Levin. Couple people kind of grudgingly sort of hinting have, like when. But everyone else is like, okay, well, he's not one of us anymore, I'm saying those because, the whole niche fandom thing is kind of what made me just finally shut down on the MCU. You know, not the stuff I still like that they've already done, but where they are now, where they seem to be going, is just not somewhere I want to tread. And so that informed my decision not to cover their material on this channel unless it was something. This is after the Doctor Strange review, which kind of stalled at 100 views and has just been sitting there. And I don't think anybody, you know, I wasn't winning over anyone who wasn't already interested in it, and the people who were already interested in the material already had made up their minds. And I'm kind of low on the food chain as far as YouTube goes, as far as being seen as some kind of authority on the stuff. Though I know I am, and I'm not saying that to sound egotistical. I mean, there's zillions of things in the universe that I know nothing about. But, you know, the comic book industry, specifically, especially Marvel Comics, is not one of them. That's something I know enormous about. And like I said, after befriending people over the years, like Roy Thomas and Arnold Drake, you know, and talking to these kind of people, Bob Almond, you know, and hearing a lot of inside stuff, good and bad, about Marvel. I'm blanking on a few others that I've talked to a great deal. I've met a lot of them, but not a lot of them have I talked to in a great amount of depth. But those are three that I have that come to mind that have worked for Marvel, and of course Arnold Drake created the Doom Patrol, and so yeah, it's an area of expertise. So rather than go on and on tooting my horn, I want to parlay that expertise into this review. So wasted a lot of time. My point being, in a roundabout way, that Roy informed me, yes, he had done Werewolf by Night. He came up with the title. It wasn't the name of the character, it was the name of the series, but it encompassed the character, much like Tomb of Dracula. So, and yeah, a young kind of guy in the early 70s, you know, kind of sort of hippie-ish, and trying to protect his little sister from the curse, and he's got to endure it. And the narrative, especially when Doug Minch took over as the writer for the rest of the run, you know, it'd be like First Moon, and he would like go through it, you know, and it almost went in real time, or you know, because there were a lot of first moons throughout the series, and second moons, and you know, being the full moon when he would, you know, completely transform, and he was a bipedal werewolf. His appearance was more a wolf man character. I'll call him a wolf man kind of character because the two most famous Wolfman characters in visual media are Lawrence Talbot, played by Lon Chaney Jr. when he was alive, and then Valdemar Daninsky, played by the great Paul Naschy, who also has passed. And I think Marvel is picking up the torch, and it's interesting because this is not what I expected them to do. I thought they were going to try to update the werewolf cinematically the way they had in the comics. Bill Sienkiewicz had redesigned him during his 80s Moon Knight run, because Moon Knight first appeared in Werewolf by Night's comic book. In the 80s, he kind of reinvented his werewolf look to be more of a post-Howling. You know, the Howling kind of reconfigured a classic type of werewolf. They were still bipedal, but they were much more wolf-like. They were much more much more animalistic and cool looking and sinister and tall and, you know, unhuman. And the transformation sequence in the the Howling, orchestrated by Rob Bottin, directed by Joe Dante, is to me still a mesmerizing 5 minutes of cinema. For horror cinema, for its makeup, breakthroughs, and just the compelling nature of it, even down to the weird electronic worry music. I think it's mesmerizing. The Howling is my favorite werewolf movie of all time. So I thought maybe they'll, and in recent years, they've shown Werewolf by Night. He kind of looks kind of in between those two extremes, between the Wolfman and between the Howling kind of werewolf. By the way, a really good movie that has werewolves that look like they do in the Howling is Dog Soldiers by Neil Marshall. Incredible werewolf movie from 2000s. One day I'll probably review it if I ever get the Blu-ray. But I love that look, and but I don't know that it's appropriate for Werewolf by Night. I mean, I get why they went that direction, and then I get why they pulled it into kind of a middle ground. But a lot of the artists who've drawn this middle ground look, I don't know. To me, it just feels like a different character altogether. And they even draw Jack Russell rather differently. I'm not saying he needs to stay a 20-year-old cat with longish hair and sideburns, but he's definitely nothing physically like that in this special. So the special really surprised me at how faithful it was to the comic books that resonated with me as a child and a teenager, and some through my adulthood. Werewolf by Night was the first werewolf I ever saw because I collected. My mom bought Marvel comics beginning at age 1.5. For some reason, I pointed out one of the comics. I think it was a Spider-Man issue. I thought if I thought hard enough, I could tell you the issue number, and it just went from there. Something about this images attracted me before I could talk, because I started talking at a very late age, like almost 3, before I could read, of course. And I don't know, it was like destiny, I guess. So the Werewolf by Night being part of Marvel, the Marvel Universe, I saw his comics, and eventually my mom bought me a couple of issues, and the first one I bought was really, really scary. Incredible art by Tom Sutton, very moody, brilliant artist who's worked for like Marvel and Warren and everybody else. Very unusual style, and it was intense. I right now have the Essential Werewolf by Night, which is like the first maybe 25 issues, I guess. The first 2 appearances were in Marvel Spotlight 1 and 2, and then he got his own series, Werewolf by Night. And Roy didn't really tell me a whole lot about his creation part in it from there, because from there he gets Jerry Conway to do most of the writing, because he was the other guy who kind of took the burden of Stan Lee's retirement from writing, next to Roy, who had the most runs on the most biggest titles. But he did a lot of smaller titles too, and Conway is kind of an acquired taste. I think if you encounter him as an adult, some of his stuff is not aged well or held up, but some surprisingly has quite well. And he was also a science fiction novelist, and he went into television, and he was one of the producers of or some of the Law and Order series, and I think that's kind of how he's spending his retirement. And of course, he became mildly famous again in recent years because he created the Punisher. So I've never met Jerry Conway. I friended him on Facebook. He seems like a nice guy. I've never really interacted with him. But I evaluated and reevaluated his work over the years. So Roy didn't really write much beyond the first story. And I think even that one he co-wrote. And same with Man Thing. They collaborated on Man Thing for Savage Tales #1, which predates Werewolf by Night by a little bit. Man Thing is my favorite horror comic ever. There's some the EC stuff comes close second. Man Thing's one of my favorite characters. I'm mentioning him because he is a major character in Werewolf by Night special. I thought he was just going to be a cameo, like an Easter egg, or they're going to test the water. So is anybody interested in this guy? Not a guy, but the way they incarnated Man Thing was even more incredible than the way they incarnated Jack Russell / Werewolf by Night. They also adapted another major Marvel horror character, Elsa Bloodstone, who was debuted in more recent years, like within the last 20 years or less. I like her concept because they killed off her father, Ulysses Bloodstone, an immortal monster hunter dating back to the 70s. He never really got his due, in his solo series. And so when Steve Gerber wrote the Incredible Climax as backup stories in the Rampaging Hulk Black and White magazine, he tied up all the loose ends, but he killed Ulysses Bloodstone. And Marvel kept him dead. It's like, well, there goes all the potential, but there's always flashbacks because that's kind of how I keep a lot of my characters alive in my story. Because when they die, they pretty much are gone. I don't do this soap opera Marvel DC bullshit. Um, Sometimes people are resurrected for various reasons, and I've touched on that in some of my Flickr Street videos. Check them out, please. um, but Elsa Bloodstone, I like the idea that his daughter was around and had a similar name and was taking up the mantle. But my first encounter with the characterization of her was in Warren Ellis's comic book Next Wave that Marvel did, which took a lot of kind of quote unquote second stringer characters. Monica Rambeau, who's now also an MCU character, Elsa Bloodstone, Machine Man, uh, one of the mutant characters, I can't remember her name, and a couple of others. And they became this kind of team that I don't know. It was a savage. Basically, it was like right up there with Mark Millar's work as far as showing contempt and hatred for the superhero genre. Uh, and it wasn't really that good. Ellis has done some great work, even for Marvel. The work he did on Dr. Druid and on Damon Hellstrom, the Son of Satan. I've covered the latter in detail on this channel. It's amazing stuff. He even had a nice short run on Thor. But when he came back to Marvel during the 2000s, when they wanted to get more bigger talent again and more British talent like DC was employing, and they pretty much got all the big names except Alan Moore. Warren Ellis had a brief run on Iron Man. Art was great by Adi Granov, and that series had a huge influence visually and in some other ways on the movie, the original Iron Man movie, 2008. Even down to the point where they kind of Adi drew Tony Stark as resembling somewhat Tom Cruise, who Avi Arad, the producer, wanted desperately to play Tony Stark. And there's a lot of people floating around out there who've picked up on there. They're all fan bros, and they have this obsession with Tom Cruise playing a variant Tony Stark from another universe in the multiverse. I don't know why. I despise Tom Cruise and his body of work, with possibly one or two slight exceptions, work-wise. And as a human being, I find him repugnant. But the thing is, he didn't get the part. I already liked Robert Downey Jr. I was happy he got the part. I was always going for the underdog. I was happy when Tobey Maguire got Spider-Man. I already was a fan of Tobey Maguire. He was very young then. So Warren Ellis did that and run on Iron Man. A lot of that stuff got adapted in Iron Man 3, which to me is a putrid film. One of the worst Marvel films. So Warren Ellis's Next Wave to me was just kind of a piece of garbage. And, they did a lot of sadistic jokes at the expense of the character Machine Man, Aaron Stack, who to me is one of Jack Kirby's greatest and most sympathetic characters. And I've always loved Machine Man. Really, really loved that character. And Warren Ellis, obviously hates the character. And I almost felt like, I know taking this stuff personally is kind of, that's what fan bros do too. And I know there are people who, get upset and, all this kind of cancel culture and everything going down. So I don't mean to sound like those people, when I say something like I felt like Warren Ellis urinated on Jack Kirby's grave. I mean, okay, it's melodramatic, it's a bit much. But I don't know, it did feel that way to me. It felt like he was saying, hey, mate, this robot character you made up is shite. I'm going to piss all over you, And I've met in passing Warren Ellis in person. He kind of does have that demeanor, unfortunately. But so anyway, that's where Elsa Bloodstone first made an impression on me, and I didn't like her character. I thought that she was written as an unlikable character, but like I said, that was Ellis's intention with Next Wave. They were all unlikable. The most likable was Monica, and even she was kind of supposedly like this brilliant expert leader character, but then they always ended up undermining her and showing her as incompetent. Because, like I said, he hates those characters, so that's what he's going to do. So I don't know how he feels about Monica being in WandaVision or in the upcoming movie The Marvels, and I could care less what he thinks. I could not care less what Warren Ellis thinks about anything. Um, but Elsa Bloodstone, so it's a different generation of this kind of character. But I love the translation in the show. It took the potential and good elements of Elsa and improved the character. Something some of the movies have done with some of the characters. A lot of comics fanatics, comics bros will hate me for saying this. They'll be like sacrilege. Um, but I really believe that it's possible. I believe the X-Men films improved on the comic book, and Grant Morrison recognized it, and therefore funneled that vibe back into the comic book and made the comic book truly great for maybe the first time ever, but definitely the first time in a long time. Um, so Elsa Bloodstone's in there. So you've got Elsa Bloodstone, Man Thing, Werewolf by Night. You've got three characters that are kind of iconic cult second string horror characters of Marvel that they've kind of trotted out variously over the last 15 years. Also, Bloodstone, Marvel after Next Wave, it's taken pretty seriously. Man Thing and Werewolf by Night almost seem like afterthoughts because, again, Marvel continually will repackage their properties in order to maintain trademark and copyright relevance. So they'll be like, well, it's been 10 years. I guess we should do a Man Thing miniseries so we can position it in the marketplace. And that's exactly how it works. And the material often reflects that. The only exception with Man Thing is when they finally published the late Steve Gerber's script. I think it's they retitled it, I believe, but Screenplay for a Living Dead Man, which was a sequel to an issue of the Man Thing comic book from the 70s called Song Cry of the Living Dead Man about this character Brian Lazarus, who was a writer, and the art was by John Buscema and Klaus Janson, and it had some text pages and a lot of abstract ideas and kind of tragic and very angst-ridden. It's incredible. Steve Gerber's Man Thing, I have all the issues. I'm missing a couple of the Fear issues, but I have the entire proper series, 1 through 22, and the giant size issues. And I have them all in the essential reprints. Well, I have the essential volume 1, so that goes up to like Man Thing, I don't know, 14 or 13 or something. So, needless to say, those are things I'm going to be holding on to and not putting on eBay. They mean a lot to me. Those characters mean a lot to me. Steve Gerber is my favorite comic book writer ever. And the pathos in Man Thing, what made Man Thing unique, I could go on for hours, so I'm not going to go there. It was a much better series than Werewolf by Night. But Werewolf by Night, there's something I loved about that guy. I mean, he didn't have much, the werewolf, he didn't have much personality. And he was a wolf man, and even I thought at a younger age, before I saw The Howling and American Werewolf in London, that era came up shortly before that. I was already kind of feeling like the Lon Chaney Wolfman look was, you needed something with a little more animalism to it. Of course, I had never seen the Valdemar Daninsky Wolfman or the Hombre Lobo series back then. No, I've seen them all now, and I'm a huge fan. I love that character dearly. So, this guy, Michael Giacchino, he scores movies. He did the music for Spider-Man No Way Home. He directed this, and it was written by a couple of writers that I wasn't as familiar with. Well, Heather Quinn co-wrote the Hawkeye series, which was pretty good. I reviewed that, but this is some fine work. First of all, this is in black and white. It has titles that are evocative of or homage to the titles of old horror films from the 1930s and 1940s, put out by Universal Studios or even the B studios like RKO or Monogram. Monogram did a lot. Bela Lugosi had a long contract with Monogram. And uses the typeface and the logos of that period and like copyright 2022, and it's in Roman numerals by Marvel Studios, and the music's real bombastic. Music's well done in this. I would expect that from a composer who's first time director of a almost feature-length piece. And casting is impeccable. Gael Garcia Bernal, who I have not seen personally a lot of his work. I'm fairly familiar with his most famous work, like what he was in, what he played, what the deal is. And I'm very aware of his reputation. And I did a little more research before Werewolf by Night came out, and I mean, this guy's been voted in like the top 25 greatest living actors on earth in more than one venue. He's like Tony and Leung. Marvel got Tony and Leung. I didn't think that would ever happen. And I believe personally, my personal belief is Tony Leung is the greatest living actor on earth. I think he's got a little competition from Tatsuya Nakadai and Choi Min-sik. They're all Asian, I know, but and all from a different Asian country. Craftsmanship of Asian films is impeccable, really. Much better than Hollywood. So it's nice to see Marvel using this kind of craftsmanship. They've touched on it in some movies, like Sam Raimi did some bold visual and stylistic things in Doctor Strange that were out of the ordinary for Marvel, and I loved it. And Taika Waititi, I mean, even though a lot of it is humor and camp, Thor Ragnarok stylistically and visually is going places that Marvel really dared not tread. And to sound like a Stan Lee quote. And then, of course, the fans ate it up, and then they turned on it when Love and Thunder came out. But all Love and Thunder was part two, of Ragnarok. It's not as good as Ragnarok. Ragnarok was, that once in a lifetime chained lightning in a bottle. No one saw it coming. You come in with a sequel, and there's a lot of weight of expectation, especially after Ragnarok and after Waititi's What We Do in the Shadows work, and of course the one he nominated for an Oscar for, Jojo Rabbit, which I called Baby Hitler in my Thor review uncharitably, but I just was drawing a blank. But he was like a baby Hitler to me, the character. Jojo Rabbit, I think is what it's called. But I liked Love and Thunder. It's packed with ideas and Easter eggs, and it's fun and it looks great. And it's just it's like a comic book come to life, a very gaudy comic book come to life. It doesn't quite have that snap that Ragnarok did, but not that freshness. But it's good. It's really good. It's one of my favorite Marvel movies now, and but it's got a lot of hate. And when that came out, people were like, "Oh my!" Doctor Strange got a lot of hate. Oddly, they made a lot of money. Doctor Strange was a huge hit, and the Multiverse of Madness. But fans started grumbling and turning on Marvel, and then Ms. Marvel kind of turned everybody against Marvel, and then She-Hulk hasn't helped the cause. Moon Knight seemed to divide everybody. Half the people seem to be like I've just described, like, oh, it sucks, more of this new Marvel shit. The other half was more like, oh man, they're trying some new stuff. This is cool. And I was in the latter camp. I didn't do a proper review of Moon Knight because that was around the time I was like, okay, I need to start backing off from all these Marvel videos. But I love Moon Knight. I really did. I think it's excellent. Werewolf by Night is next level shit, though. Like I said, it's black and white. The cinematography is fantastic. It has the conceit where one thing is in color through it and everything else is black and white. In this case, it's the Bloodstone. The Bloodstone was, in the comic books, a fragment of a larger kind of strange gem, and I can't remember if it came from another planet or another dimension. It was kind of magical, and it fragmented and broke, and one of the pieces embedded itself in this caveman's chest, and he lived forever after that. And he became civilized and eventually became a hunter of monsters. And that was Ulysses Bloodstone. A cool origin, kind of similar in a way to Vandal Savage's origin in DC. I don't know if I'm sure someone's pointed that out before. Vandal Savage did come first, so, the actual original Ulysses Bloodstone two-parter isn't really that great. The art's kind of cool. It was somebody who didn't normally work for Marvel. I can't remember who. I want to say Sonny Trinidad, but that's not right. John Warner, though, I believe, wrote it. John Warner did a little work for Marvel. He did a nice run on Son of Satan and a good bit of work on the black and white magazines. I think he was one of the editors or editor-in-chief of maybe Deadly Hands of Kung Fu or one of those. Um, but he's somebody that never really, I guess, caught on with fans, or he never really wanted to stick it out with Marvel. But anyway, I don't know. I don't know if he created Ulysses Bloodstone or not, but he wrote the first 2 issues. And like I said, they're not great, but there's so many good ideas in them. And then Gerber did the black and white stuff, and that's kind of like, wow, okay, this is great. And then it's over. It's kind of like when Gerber took over Thongor. Thongor was, started as kind of a middling Conan knockoff after King Kull had already come out. Let's do Thongor. Let's do a Lynn Carter character. Because he wrote a lot of Robert E. Howard pastiche work. Sword and Sorcery's End, man, and it was even before Red Sonja got her own comic book. But Thongor had a series in a comic book called Creatures on the Loose. Go figure. And great title though. And first couple were kind of cool, because the Lemuria novels with Thongor by Lynn Carter are interesting. The guy who was Lynn Carter's literary agent and the Thongor Authority was Robert. What's his last name? My brain went completely fucking blank. I want to say Robert Wolf. That's not his name. But he's a guy who married me and my ex-wife because he's ordained. And I finally had to part company with him on social media when the Trump thing set in too deeply. And I didn't react to that stuff as hard as a lot of people did. But I still was like, I don't know, man. I thought this guy was, it's like he was pretending to be somebody else at our wedding. And that's cool. That was considerate. And he turned out really to be kind of an extremely religious, I already knew that, but right-wing religious, MAGA, borderline racist, if not racist, kind of character. But he is a Lovecraftian scholar, and I do remember his last name, but I won't say it, so nobody can accuse me of slander. But some of you guys probably know who I'm talking about. So he was Lynn Carter's literary agent, so he and I talked a good bit about the Thongor comics at our dinner at my wedding. And Gerber took over near the end, and he had one of the Filipino wave artists, Vicente Alcazar, and those books are just gold. I've got an extra copy of one of them that I'm selling for $6 on my eBay store if you're interested in sampling them. I'll put my link to my eBay store below. But in any case, Gerber did the same thing with Bloodstone. Gerber was great at rescuing characters and digging deep into them, and great also at creating his own characters and characters that have, outlived him and that have outlasted the memory of him even creating them. There's a lot of characters that he created that are popular now or well known, and no one has any clue he created them. Silver Samurai, who was in the Wolverine movie, that's a great example. But there's plenty of others. But so he never wrote Werewolf by Night. So yeah, Werewolf by Night started with Roy and Jerry Conway and various artists. Mike Ploog was the original artist. He is incredible, and he drew almost every major Marvel horror character in that period. He had a run on Man-Thing. He was the original Ghost Rider artist. He had a run original Werewolf by Night artist. I don't know if he did the first issue, but he did the first several. He was the original artist on the Monster Frankenstein series. He occasionally guested and did some other books, but pretty much kept right in that Man-Thing, Werewolf by Night, Ghost Rider, Frankenstein groove. And he had a very kind of a cartoony style, but very cool, strongly evocative of Will Eisner, and rightfully so, because he kind of was his apprentice at his studio. That's kind of where he learned his trade, was under Eisner. And of course, I encountered Ploog well before Eisner, so it was weird when I saw Eisner. I'm like, this guy looks like Mike Ploog, and then I read, the connection. Mike Ploog is an incredible artist. One of my very favorites. Somebody also that I met in passing at a convention. Really wish I'd tried to track him down and really have a conversation. I regret that. So yeah, he had a good run on Werewolf by Night, and then gradually this artist Don Perlin took over, and he did the whole rest of the run. Perlin was a workhorse, like a workman-like artist. His stuff looked a little eccentric and bizarre. It wasn't really that dynamic or cutting edge, but he was very reliable, and he had a weird vibe because he'd done some other horror comics before working for Marvel. And he became like the Werewolf by Night artist, and then later he became the Defenders artist. And I think he penciled the last 60 issues of the Defenders 152 issue run. It's pretty fucking impressive. Um, and he was really then only as good as his inker, who he kind of always let the inkers overwhelm him. Werewolf by Night was a lot of him, really, though. Perlin drew the first appearance of Moon Knight. I don't know if he designed the character Moon Knight, but I liked his interpretation of Moon Knight. But yeah, I mean, Werewolf by Night. So this is like my childhood, Man Thing, Werewolf by Night. So what they did basically, if you've read about the movie, you already know the plot is basically this, old school homage to old horror movies, and it's supposed to be a bit more violent than anything Marvel's done, and they got away with more gore because of being in black and white. And they decided to try something different for Halloween, and it was a big chance for Disney to try to make up for some of the poor decisions that they've allowed Marvel, or maybe forced Marvel to make recently, and a semi-redemption, a quasi-redemption of sorts. And Bernal, looks nothing like Jack Russell, and he's a Latino or Hispanic actor, but he's still called Jack Russell, so it doesn't really matter. And but he's great. He's extremely likable, sympathetic. He's very mellow, and he basically goes to this meeting of these monster hunters because they go to the funeral of Ulysses Bloodstone. So, as in the comic book, Bloodstone was this long-lived monster hunter, except in the show, he's part of a long family of them, and what's the lineage has carried down the Bloodstone. It's not embedded on Ulysses or later worn by Elsa as in the comic, but it is worn by each generation. So Ulysses had recently died. Elsa had been like his estranged daughter for 20 years. This is on the show, and played by Laura Donnelly, a very attractive British actress, 40 years old, mostly done stage and cable TV series. I'm not really familiar with her. I recognized her, but she did an excellent job as Elsa Bloodstone. Made me like the character for the first time, other than just the idea of her character, but actually like her character. Some people have complained about the short length of this thing. I think it's like 52 minutes or something. And I get that, but it is tight. And I mean, it is concise. And a lot of it is character stuff. There is action, there is gore, there is horror, there is special effects and supernatural shit and really weird shit. But, there's a lot. And there is humor. It's really dialed way down from the usual Marvel stuff, especially the recent stuff. And it's a little more of a naturalistic humor that's flowing from these eccentric characters. It's not this contrived topical humor where somebody makes some topical reference and then there's a beat of silence, and then some smart ass comment. And that's become Marvel's go-to rhythm. And as a consequence, a lot of their dialogue in these last couple of series just completely sucks. It has no inventiveness, no intellect behind it, no concepts, no ideas. I mean, She-Hulk, the only real concepts in She-Hulk were Bruce Banner. He was the mouthpiece for the ideas, and then when he left, that took care of that. You didn't have any more intelligent characters after that. I mean, you may love She-Hulk and Jen Walters. You may love Tatiana Maslany as Jen Walters and She-Hulk. But her character on TV, as in the comic books, is no rocket scientist. She's not stupid, but she's kind of a plebeian person, a kind of an uninteresting. And in the show, they're trying to play it up like she's socially awkward, she's a nerd. But then on the other hand, they want you to believe she's a brilliant lawyer, which they prove in the Daredevil episode that she's not a brilliant lawyer, because Matt easily beats her in a case and makes her look like an idiot. Not just to make her look like an idiot, he's just better at what he does than she is. So they expect you to believe she's a brilliant lawyer. She won Female Lawyer of the Year. I mean, it's like, is this parody? It's got to be parody. It's got to be satire because it's too ironic and silly not to be openly and admittedly ironic. And of course, then complains about men, and yet She-Hulk's had sex with a guy. Jen's had sex with two guys overnight, the second being Matt Murdock. So it's kind of the faux nerd, well-off person. I mean, she's not rich, but she's not hurting, and her family is depicted in an atrocious manner, similar to Ms. Marvel, just kind of a bunch of stereotypes, cliches that are loud and stupid and ignorant. It's really pathetic and embarrassing to me to watch it. And so, yeah, I've watched all but the last one, and I don't know, I just may not do it. So, Werewolf by Night is like another universe in its vibe, tonality. So not only does it create this concise, simple story and play it out and use all these visual and musical homages to past horror films, and I do believe, I could be wrong, but I do believe there's a little strain of Valdemar Daninsky by Naschy in this Werewolf by Night. And I'm sure this guy's seen that. Obviously, there's Lon Chaney. So he looks more like a Wolfman. He looks very similar to the original design of the comics. As Jack Russell, he looks nothing like. He's slightly older. Bernal's around 42. He's Hispanic. He's got shorter, dark hair. And he wears these kind of like war paint makeup, tattoos, or whatever in his face, kind of similar to what you see on Shuri and the Black Panther sometimes. The little dots and things. I like that kind of stuff. Real tribal sigils and kind of things. And I have a telepathic female character who wears that stuff on her face a lot. And I actually based her appearance on a friend of mine who does the same, who is a witch. And he hints broadly that the tattoos are part of either his curse, like a mark, or else something magical that's painted on him that helps protect him from losing control as a werewolf, or helps him stay centered. Now, I could be wrong about both of those. Those are just raw speculation based on dialogue. I'm not going to be a literalist and argue for or against it. I'm not going to be a mad speculator. Like I said, the fan bro mentality is distinguished by its lack of intellect and mentality. There's no mental in its mentality. Yeah, he's more mellow than Jack Russell. He is tormented, though. They got that right. He doesn't want to be a werewolf. A lot of it's basic. I chain myself in once a month, just like Lawrence Talbot, just like Jack Russell, First Moon, all this stuff. But it's straight from the fucking comic books. I mean, and the fact that they combined the cinematic part, the visual and musical part, as homaging these other films in this vein, but they made the characters so rich, though economical, and again, you could read a lot of different things into it. If you have not read the comic books about Werewolf by Night or Man-Thing, and you watch this, you're going to be at a disadvantage for sure, and people are probably like, I don't give a fuck, is it a good movie? Yes, it's a good movie, but what I'm saying is there's levels and there's a layer, and that's the main reason I'm reviewing this, because it succeeds as a piece of art, and it succeeds brilliantly as an adaptation of another medium piece of art. So I praised Elsa and I praised Jack and the characters and the actors and compared them to the comics. Let's talk real briefly about Man-Thing before I wrap up. I talked about him already, but him as a character. Ted Sallis was a character that was a scientist, and he got sabotaged, and he, blew up, caught on fire, jumped in the swamp, and he had this kind of weird super soldier formula in his bloodstream, and he mixed with the chemistry of the swamp, and he became Man-Thing. Now, Swamp Thing is a more famous character. Swamp Thing has had 2 movies, a TV series, a cartoon series. This run by Alan Moore is considered some of the greatest comic books ever written. And then recently he's had another TV series, which was pretty good. The best adaptation that I've seen to other media. However, it's solid. I liked it, but it dropped the ball on a lot of things. And what's interesting is the areas it dropped the ball. Well, there was a Man Thing movie too, and it was loosely based on a story I think called "Cry of the Native" by Steve Gerber that combines like a industrials called F.A. Schist, get it, fascist, and basically tearing down this area of in Florida where there's these Native Americans, and so there's that whole clash. And this was the early '70s. That stuff was extremely topical then, and Man Thing kind of lumbers through the story. So the movie takes the basic idea and follows the events somewhat. Just expands it because it's only a one issue story, and it's like an hour and a half movie. And I still have it, but I'm going to sell it. Probably won't get more than a couple of dollars for it. It's a very disliked movie, not like hated like Morbius or Infamous or jeered at like Spawn is sometimes, but still, it's kind of like, oh, Man Thing. I tried to like it. I wanted to like it, but they made Man Thing a bit more of an abstract character physically. It didn't seem to have a mind, which is in the comic books, the Man Thing doesn't have an organized mind. That is true, and that's a weird element to Man Thing. He basically everything he does is he's an empath, and everything he does is driven by human emotion. So he responds to the whole spectrum of emotions. Like he almost sees emotions. I don't know if they've ever said that. They should. They should do that in the movie in a movie. Um, but he feels them and he creates responses, and the worst ones are anger and hatred cause him pain and distress. Fear causes him agony, and the only way to relieve the agony is to destroy it. And when he tries to destroy a person who is terrified, he secretes this kind of stuff from his bizarre physiology and contact with their flesh, and it burns like sulfur. It can burn them to ashes. So I think it'd be good to know some of the stuff watching this show. Some of the things that somebody like, what's up with this Man Thing? What's this about? I know there's probably a zillion articles that, like I said, I have not read yet. I may read a couple, torture myself. But I'm sure a lot of people will be like that. So what is this character Ted? Because Jack tells Elsa to call him Ted. And this is the thing, they're best friends, Jack and Ted. That was a masterstroke. They had like one or two team ups in the old days, and then I think they've both been on some of these monster teams like the Howling Commandos in recent years. But I don't read the modern Marvel comics. But when I was a kid, they were in a loose team one shot called Legion of Monsters, which had those two plus Morbius. Yes, Morbius, and the fourth one I think was Ghost Rider, and um, it was one issue, and nobody thought much about it. I thought it was cool. I think I owned it briefly, and either lost it, got stolen, traded it, but I know I read it a couple of times, and I was going back and trying to get all the issues of Marvel Premiere, the whole series. I had the Doctor Strange ones, I had one of the Warlocks. There were a few I didn't really want to spend much money on, but I had like the whole run, the Alice Cooper issues, the Doctor Who issues, the 3D Man, all of these great, great, great stories and characters. Weird World, Secret 3000. Marvel Premiere is a gold mine, and they're cheap as fuck on eBay. I strongly recommend if you want to dig deep into some old Marvel lore, not spend much money and just read this shit that may or may not ever be reprinted in trade paperback. Collect Marvel Premiere, but be judicious. And the problem is the issue with Legion of Monsters is really high now, and after this special is probably skyrocketed. And I would just like to own it to have it in my collection. But man, if I had two copies, I would certainly sell one. I sold my copy of Savage Tales #1 with Man Thing when he was originally rumored to be part in some way of WandaVision. That got way out of hand. But it helped me. I mean, I had bought a very fine copy of Savage Tales. My second copy I'd ever owned was Upgrade. I bought it for $80 on eBay in 2015. And I sold it for almost $600 a year and a half ago. So that's probably, a really, really nice copy was around 1,000. Like mint. and up. So now I don't know. After the special, and now Werewolf by Night stuff's going to be really pricey. But I've got the stories. I've got either the original comics or the essential books reprinting. So that's what matters. But Marvel Premiere was a cool one off I like to collect. Odd series. I'd still like to collect odd back issues while they're still cheap before their characters all become movie characters and become too expensive. And then I either can't ever own them or I have to sell them because I really need the money. But that was one issue called the Legion of Monsters. There's also a magazine Marvel briefly had called Legion of Monsters, which was in the Marvel Universe and had stories. I believe had Dracula, Frankenstein, I think Man-Thing possibly. But it had a character called Manphibian, which was their answer to Creature from the Black Lagoon. And for the first issue of the magazine had a great Neil Adams painting cover. And, Manphibian was just languished. Everybody forgot about him. He has been reintroduced in recent years, but I don't know how developed he's been. But I thought it was a cool character. Funny name, but cool character. So, Man-Thing. So I've described Man-Thing in the comics. Man-Thing is pretty much like a plot device in the comics. He reacts. He's not a proactive character. And they modified him a bit for the show, but I think it's a direction that makes sense. They didn't make him more like Swamp Thing. See, in the movie Man-Thing, they made him more like Swamp Thing as far as his powers, going through the vegetation and animating it and killing all the fascist industrials who were trying to fuck up the Indians. He was like a big part of nature. That's more post-Alan Moore Swamp Thing kind of scenario than any Man-Thing story. So they got Man-Thing right in this. He looks incredible. I mean, he doesn't look totally realistic, but he looks great. He looks cool as shit, comics accurate, and the black and white lighting is fantastic. And when they finally show him in color at the end, that's when they pick up the ball that the Man-Thing. That's when they pick up the ball that the Swamp Thing DC series from a couple of years ago dropped, which was, Swamp Thing became, after he got kind of reborn and reinvented under Alan Moore, he became more like a piece of nature, and he started sprouting like tubers and flowers and all kinds of shit, and he was real lush looking, and in this show, he's somewhat, Man-Thing is somewhat like that. Man-Thing was in the comics too, but not quite as delineated as the Alan Moore era Swamp Thing was. But yeah, he's shaped like Man-Thing, and Man-Thing has kind of like a big hump, over back and behind his head. And when they finally turn to color in the last scene, and they play with Somewhere Over the Rainbow, I know it's like too on the nose, but it's like, okay, it's a black and white homage, got one thing in color, and then it turns into color. So all this stuff's been done a million times before, but it's just so fun and novel for a Marvel production to do something cinematic. That was fun, but not just fun to be, oh, it's fun, it's funny, it's going to make some money, but actually seemed like there was some love and care that went into it, some genuineness. And that's really lacking. There was more genuineness in Werewolf by Night than there was in the whole She-Hulk or Ms. Marvel series. I mean, even the Daredevil episode had less humanity to it, of She-Hulk. It had less humanity to it than this special. And it's like when I did the video, please look it up, like it, subscribe. No, watch it if you want to, if you're interested. I have one called Ms. Marvel versus the Boys, Antitheses. Ms. Marvel and the Boys, whatever. But the blurb on my thumbnail graphic is Ms. Marvel versus the Boys. And at the end, my conclusion was the Boys was a tonic for Ms. Marvel. I still stand by that. But now I believe Marvel has themselves made a tonic for She-Hulk and by extension Ms. Marvel. And that is Werewolf by Night. So, just real briefly, let me tell you a couple of more charming things I like about this, and then I'm going to wrap up, I promise. Jack is a very kind character. He doesn't want to be a werewolf. He's cursed. Elsa is very cynical and hard bitten, and she's kind of trying to reclaim her birthright. But her stepmother, Verussa, played by Harriet Hanson, I think is her name, who was in Frasier. She's kind of a bitch, and she's a character that kind of rides the line of other characters that this woman's played that almost typecast. But she delivers as it goes on. As it goes on, her character becomes less over the top, uh, stereotypical, and more of a threat. More you take her more seriously, and she's more vile and more in charge. And she's in charge of this little coterie of monster hunters, and Jack basically is going undercover pretending to be one of them. And their mission is to all hunt this monster that's been captured and let loose on the grounds, and sport. And the one who wins gets the Bloodstone, and Elsa doesn't automatically get it. So there's all the rules by Verussa, the heir, Ulysses' widow. And they show Ulysses. He talks about his will and his intention, and it's his corpse. On Wikipedia, it says it's a magically reanimated corpse. That's not how I read it. I read it as a mechanically reanimated. In other words, he recorded audio. He's not reacting to people around him. He's dead. He recorded an audio for them to hear, and he's rigged it so it speaks through his body, which has been mechanically operated to pose in certain ways. So that's how I read it. I don't read it as he's a zombie or anything like that. He's dead. He's talking, but it's already been, you know what I mean? Anyway, but again, people write things on Wikipedia about something they've never seen, have no clue about. But I could be wrong. Maybe you disagree. Let me know. But so he laid out these terms, and the hunt was on, and blah blah blah. So the monster that they're trying to kill turns out to be Man-Thing. And when Jack first encounters the monster, of course, unless you know who Man-Thing is, you have no clue what the fuck is going on. This big hand grabs him, and I love this portrayal. He's like, hey, he's like his brother, his best friend, and then you see Man-Thing's face, and he just nails it. But see, he does have intelligence in this, unlike in the comics. But in this interpretation, it's like he knows he's Ted Salos, or he recognizes that name. He likes being called that. But it's like it's buried deep. Not as deep, though, as in the comics. He can react. He can sort of communicate. Like he vocalizes. He doesn't talk, but he vocalizes. He almost laughs in the last scene in a weird way. He's got a great effect for his voice. And I forgot the name of the guy who did that, those vocalizations. And I forgot the name of the guy who played him and did the motion capture. But they both did great. And man, he's alive, and I did that thing again that's happened to me a few times over the years with Marvel. I cried, because I was like, that's Man-Thing, that's my man, that's who I grew up with. I'm spending all this time talking about all the shit I own with him and all these things I've been through with him and his stories. And there he is on the screen moving around and shambling around. I think if they continue portraying him this way going forward, I hope they'll continue using him. They've got it made. They struck a perfect balance. And again, there's an economy of dialogue and action. So it's open to certain interpretations, but also communicates a lot. And like I said, if you already know the characters, it's very rich, and it's very rewarding. So in the end, like I said, it turns into color, and Elsa gets the castle, and Jack is turned into the werewolf, and between him and Elsa, they destroy all the monster hunters and the stepmother. And it's pretty gory. It's definitely gorier than any other Marvel non-Netflix production. And I don't know, I love the way the werewolf looks. The only way he looks slightly different than his original design, he's got the same shape, he moves the same way, he leaps the same way as the comic panels. He wears only the pants, and the rest of him is bare and furry. That was kind of his look, and kind of like the Hulk used to have. His face is a little more human. Just the middle of his face looks a little more like Jack. And he still has the little tattoos and or paintings or whatever, these sigils on his face, his nose is kind of flatter and his snout light. He does have fangs. His eyes are more intense, but his features, you can tell it's um, Bernal, and that's I know part of Marvel, they have that aversion, that weirdness with their stars, like they got to take the mask off all the time and hype the stars. Everybody's got to know their face, and this seems like kind of another twist on that, make him look more like Gael Garcia Bernal, but I didn't mind. I liked it, and he acted just like the werewolf. I mean, I don't know. And anyway, he becomes Jack again, and when bleeds into color, he's got blue hair. I thought that was interesting. And Man Thing is perfect from the comics. He's green and mossy and brown, and on his big hump, he's got mushrooms growing. And I thought that was kind of a nod to Swamp Thing growing more lush vegetation over the years, and tubers you could take off, and if you ate them, you tripped, psychedelically, or even sexual ecstasy could occur. And the mushrooms, man, I was like, wow, he's got mushrooms sprouting in his back. I mean, it looked incredible. And their little repartee, you don't know the background, you're getting a bare minimum of information, but Bernal is a brilliant actor, and every note is perfect. So I'm going to go. I talked your ear off. I didn't want to go over an hour, but I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. I think it's one of the very best things Marvel's done, and it's MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, has ever put out. Possibly in my top 5 favorites ever. Maybe I already put it on Letterboxd list at number 6. So I don't know if it'll nudge into the top 5. We'll see. But I watched it twice, and I started watching it a third time before I did this video. So I think I've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's and told you why I like it, what I like about it compared to the comics, et cetera, et cetera. So this is why I'm doing another Marvel one. And this, I believe, unless they shock me again in a good way like this will be my last MCU video for hopefully a long, long time. I'm going to dive deep into the streaming, though, for Halloween. So I'll be doing the Halloween streams all month. I don't know how often I'll post them. I'm not going to be doing them constantly. I'm not going to be landing on certain days like I did in 2020. Like I said, I'm loose. The only kind of special thing I want to do is on Halloween itself for a special movie that I've never actually reviewed, but I should have a long time ago. But I've been reserving it for a special kind of occasion. Other than that, yeah, I'm winging it. It's mostly going to be things I haven't seen before. So this is the first. So Halloween streams number 1. That's Werewolf by Night by Giacchino, 2022, based on the Marvel Comics characters created by Roy Thomas, Jerry Conway, and others. So thanks for watching. Rock on. Watch Werewolf by Night, man.